And then when I'm talking, please feel free. Please interject, because if you don't say anything, I'm just going to talk for 29 minutes straight.
Oh,
I'll try to.
I was just going to sit here and not listen.
I'm going to try to pause periodically. You just glaze over.
No, I'm always interested.
Okay. All right, we got that recorded. Perfect. All right, let's do this thing. So we can play some more RL.
LG. IRL. Did you have you finally figured out what LG means?
Last game.
LG real.
Welcome to Namely 90s. Wow. The podcast that takes you back to the time before smartphones, Google, and Y2K. Join your hosts as they relive the pop culture that shaped a generation and the parts that many people wish they could forget. Listen in to the conversation about how the decade defined those who spent their childhood there and how it shaped them as adults. So, turn down the grunge and dial up the internet. Let's get started. It's time for Namely 90s.
That's right. You're listening to Namely 90s. My name's Andrew, and over there is Brandon.
That's me.
You can find us online at namely90s.com or on Instagram and Bluesky at Namely90s. You can also find us on YouTube every Monday at youtube.com/@namely90s. And if you'd like to get in late and support us through Patreon, head over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/namely90s. Say Patreon one more time. And you're signed up for one of our support levels.
You're always welcome to support us even after the show is over.
Yeah, shoot. I'll send you my Venmo. Yeah. Well, we're back. Counting down the weeks. We are, as you know, back. Ending the podcast in May. Mm-hmm. Don't fret. I suspect another project will be coming around. I suddenly have more free time in my life. I have been lightly demoted, so
that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, but hey, that means more time for Rocket League and various podcasting or other media projects.
Yeah, reduce the stresses that were stressing you in your life.
Yeah. And the good news is the world today is helping me achieve that goal. Oh God, no, it's a disaster, literally and figuratively.
Mm-hmm. Quite literally.
Quite tragic news with 2 plane crashes in essentially 2 days, 3 days, 48-hour period. The crash obviously in DC, and then now tonight, as of this recording, the crash of that smaller jet in Pennsylvania. So our thoughts with those affected, and that's really sad. But I guess what's particularly disturbing is how this is just distracting from all of the shitty things Donald Trump is doing to this country.
Yeah.
Not the least of which is gutting the FAA and then blaming it on them.
As first of all,
assigning blame when it hasn't been determined what the cause was, and then assigning that blame to a group that he gutted.
Yeah.
Not to politicize it too much, but here I am politicizing it.
He started it.
He started it.
Your 5-year-old.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's happening, and what else? We're still deporting people. That's fun.
There's ice raids going on around here right now.
Sorry, did you say ice capades? No.
Yes. Yeah. There's vans. There's there's a Mexican restaurant in Morro Bay that's closed until further notice because the entire kitchen staff won't show up to work. It's like
the entire federal government that he's offering to just be like, hey, you can quit if you want. We'll give you your check through September. That's just a blanket rule. I thought it was people who don't want to return to the office, but air traffic controllers are eligible for that. And I'm pretty sure air traffic controllers can't work from home. Imagine you're working from home and your Xfinity goes out, I just imagine that.
Air traffic control. Yeah.
Yeah. But just, it's crazy. And the fact that people can't even do their jobs in the institutions and restaurants that we all visit every day and take for granted is ridiculous,
Yeah.
No, shouldn't take them for granted, but you know what I mean?
I mean, like, what's that Anthony Bourdain quote where it's like, the U.S. population has a really love-hate relationship with illegal Mexican migrant workers, but if you were to deport them all at once and immediately, the entire food infrastructure would fall apart.
If Donald Trump is eating in a restaurant, he is definitely benefited from, migrant workers in this country.
What do you think?
You know what I mean?
Staffs Mar-a-Lago.
It's crazy. You would collapse the entire industry.
Mm-hmm.
And how's that good for the economy? It's like the that meme that's floating around that's like it's the Gulf of Mexico, but it's crossed out and says Gulf of how does this lower grocery prices?
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, if you are some conservative blowhard and think that Donald Trump's doing a good job and are still listening to us for some reason, leave a comment, subscribe.
Or you can go on Dr. Drew's podcast website thing that looks like Fox News and join him and Alex Jones for a stimulating interview of fucking nonsense. Sorry, this is going to be an explicit episode. It probably should be anyway. I'm just saying.
Okay.
I know we don't do a lot of explicits, but
that's what the E-Tag's for.
I mean, it's also a bit graphic, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But
good Lord.
Well, no, like just descriptions of things.
He's pulling out his report. But we still have 5 minutes to fill. So
what was the? I was gonna reference that song by Donald, like that Donald Trump thing where he said, "I'm gonna come" or something, and he's like, "Bill Gates came." You heard this remix of the "I'm gonna come" song?
No, you told me about it though.
It's worth checking into, honestly.
Is it like Shmo? The guy that did the Tiger Blood Charlie Sheen one.
I actually don't know. Is that person still alive?
Charlie Sheen or the person that did the remix?
Kendrick Lamar is going to be the halftime performer. Here's one thing about that. I'm not going to go into my opinion of that, but
you've already done it on the podcast.
I could have sworn like a month ago they announced who it was, and it wasn't him. Did it change, or am I misremembering?
You are misremembering.
Who were they announcing? There was some other musical artist that got announced as performing at some big thing.
A month ago.
Am I thinking of last year? Oh my God. I might be thinking of last year's Super Bowl. Who was it last year?
Bruno Mars, I think.
No.
Does Bruno Mars is gay?
Uh-oh. It was, I gotta look it up now. It was Usher. No, I swear they had announced somebody else difference. And they changed it, but I can't. Apparently
not. Make the booty go smack.
So yeah, apparently I have not connected to pop culture whatsoever.
No, especially with your opinions on Grammy-winning Kendrick Lamar.
Well, I mean, is one not entitled to dislike?
You are certain types of music? Allowed to have wrong opinions.
Think about how many Grammy Award winners. Think about how many country artists won Grammys. I think I've just found your kryptonite.
I'll listen to the Chicks.
The Chicks, yeah. You can't call them the Dixie Chicks anymore. Also, remember that time they got canceled from country music because they're Democrats?
Mm-hmm. Which I never would have guessed back when we were children.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's cool. So apparently I thought it was somebody else. What do you know?
A landslide will.
How dare you? That's a cover of a legendary Fleetwood Mac song.
I almost said Rascal Flatts. So, I forget a friend or a girl that I was seeing. She was like, we were listening to the Smashing Pumpkins version of Landslide, and she's like, I love the original Dixie Chicks version.
No,
and then,
no.
Yeah. Then we broke up immediately.
Fleetwood Mac.
Mm-hmm.
Dear God. I mean, I've been guilty of that too, where I thought a song was the original, but I mean, that song, I don't know.
Yeah. How could you? It's have you not seen the guy drinking ocean spray cranberry juice skateboarding to was it Rumors? What was it?
Rumors is the name of the CD.
What's
Go Your Own Way?
No, it's I think it's Rhiannon.
Yeah.
Ocean spray cranberry juice.
Oh, my nose is
guy song. Fleetwood Mac Dreams. He's vibing Dreams. Do you not know this meme from 4 years ago?
No.
It was during COVID, and this dude, it was I think like on TikTok or something, and it's just like him just like on a longboard, just he's in a hoodie and he's like riding a longboard and just drinking out of an entire carton of ocean spray cranberry juice, and the song that's on is Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, and it's just yeah,
strange.
It made people smile.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Fleetwood Mac's good. Bummer about Fleetwood's on Front Street getting burned down in Lahaina a couple years back.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I actually got to go there, which I always wanted to, and then it burned down like 3 months later.
Oh, I thought you went after it burned down.
Let's think about that. I visited the town of Lahaina as a tourist after it burned down. No, it was about 3 months before.
There was a reason why you didn't go previously, and I couldn't remember why.
It was because of over tourism, like post-COVID was hurting the island.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was being all woke and shit.
Bringing my levity and eloquence to this episode already.
Yeah, great. That's 10 minutes, right?
It is 10 minutes, 30 seconds plus whatever the intro is and whatever a little banter before the episode was.
So first thing I want to say is, because of what's happened this week, and my interest in aviation, like I'm super interested in commercial aviation. I did a flight sim for a while. Like I find it all very fascinating.
I studied aerospace engineering in school.
Yep. There you go. So, we're going to talk about some of the prominent air disasters, plane crashes, call them what you will, from the 1990s, and also specifically telling the stories, but how these incidents led to improvements in our air safety, which caused us to basically go, since 2009, we haven't had a deadly commercial air accident in the United States, which is pretty remarkable. Like for all the failings there are in the system, we're still one of the best, safest countries in terms of air travel. So doesn't mean we couldn't be better, but it's hopefully learning some accidents like these that can do that. So that said, I also I'm going to say viewer discretion is advised. Some descriptions of the events that may trouble some people if they're afraid of flying or have been affected by an air disaster. So just a fair warning.
And I get to be the funny guy this week.
Yeah, what a great task I've given you. You have to try to be funny. But, I mean, there's places to be funny in this, but mostly not.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are going to start with ValuJet Airlines Flight 592, which took place on May 11th, 1996. And the name of that company kind of tells the story. I'll say that.
Spirit Airline 1.0.
Yeah. I think it was absorbed by... They got absorbed by somebody. I don't remember which company it was, but they've gone away now.
They were rebranded as AirTran Airlines and merged into AirTran Airways.
And then AirTran got bought by
Southwest.
Southwest. That's exactly what I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, in this situation, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 operating the Miami to Atlanta route crashed into the Florida Everglades about 10 minutes after departing Miami as a result of a fire in the cargo compartment caused by mislabeled and improperly stored hazardous cargo. Do you remember this?
I don't. Honestly, the only one I remember is TWA Flight 800.
Spoiler alert. Anyway, I remember this one because my parents always had like the local news on at night before dinner. So I usually see these things, but I remember specifically, I didn't know anything else about it other than it crashed in the Everglades and it was really difficult to like figure all the stuff out because of its access. So we'll come into that a little bit later when we talk about the search and rescue and recovery efforts. But that was, I do actually remember this one to some degree.
And it was a DC-10?
I mean, I copied directly from Wikipedia and it said it was a DC-9, so I'm going to trust that.
No, sorry, there was a different part that says DC. Did you say DC-9 already?
DC-9, yeah.
Not listening.
So the this DC-9 in particular was 27 years old and been previously flown by Delta. Its first flight occurred in 1969. Now, granted, it was 96, so that year sounds really old, but it's not as bad as it seems.
Yeah.
Delta had that plane until 92. It was sold back to McDonnell Douglas, and then they resold the plane to ValuJet in 93. I always check the age of my airplane when I fly. And I flew on a plane that was 35 years old. I was like, do I have to get on this? I think the issue is just like, I mean, I've done that many cycles. Like they're obviously safe, you know, but they do get these like micro cracks and things in some of the components and parts. So it's just a little bit nerve wracking and they feel a bit rickety sometimes when they're of that age.
And, you know, these days, maintenance isn't done as often as it used to be.
Well, especially the value carriers, like sometimes they do, in theory, skimp, or at least this one may have. But in any case, this particular aircraft had suffered a series of incidents in the 2 years before the crash, including 2 aborted takeoffs and 8 emergency landings. Engine and pressurization errors were the primary issues. And in May 95, the FAA issued a rewiring directive for all DC-9 cockpits because the wire bundles in the switch panel could cause fire and uncontrolled smoke throughout the cockpit, which is not great when you're on a flight.
Why were they not recalled or
that's
decommissioned?
The rewiring directive was to fix that, apparently. But it was not a matter of pilot experience, though. Captain Candy Kubek, 35 years old, and First Officer Richard Hazen, 52 years old, were in command. And both of them were extremely experienced pilots. I don't think there's any question. There's nothing, they could have done or didn't do that, that caused this. In total, there were 110 people on board, 105 passengers, mostly from the Florida and Georgia areas, and obviously the 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. The plane departed at 2:04 local time and departed from runway 9 left and began a normal climb out.
I'm sorry, I'm just confused why Candy Kubik has an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to her.
I don't know. She looks like a cool lady, Yeah. But other than this, what's she famous for?
This.
Interesting.
But like, she married Roger Kubik on the Queen Mary. Like, someone seriously has.
Someone went into
filled this out
the
for
detail.
no reason.
So anyway, took off at 2:04. About 6 minutes later, at 2:10 roughly, the passengers began to smell smoke, and at the same time, the pilots heard a loud bang in their headsets and noticed that the plane was losing electrical power. Seconds later, the flight attendant enters the cockpit and informs the flight crew of a fire in the passenger cabin. Unfortunately, on the cockpit voice recorder, they could actually hear the passengers shouting about a fire. The flight attendant manual specifically stated that they should not open the cockpit door when there's smoke or harmful gases in the cabin. That makes sense, right? But of course, this is ValuJet. The intercom not functioning. No other way to tell the pilots. Like, knock twice for fire. I mean, you've got to. So they had to open the door, and whether that actually affected the pilots or not, I don't know. But that was against policy,
right?
But if the intercom doesn't work, how can you make that a policy?
Yeah,
right?
It is strange that happened. The whole idea of a black box is kind of mortifying to me because just
they can also apparently withstand almost anything. Like, they are almost indestructible, which is crazy considering the forces that are at play. But they typically have the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder in separate, devices, apparently.
Yeah, and who doesn't need to hear all of that?
Yeah. Imagine being the person who has to sift through all that. Ugh, gross. And imagine being the person on CNN who has to keep playing it over and over again because we can't help ourselves. Anyway, so when this all happened, the pilots immediately asked ATC to return to Miami and were given instructions. 1 minute later, the first officer requested the nearest available airport, and Captain Kubek began to turn the plane left in preparation for the return. 3 minutes later, the Flight 592 disappeared from radar, 2:13 p.m. when it crashed, about 10 minutes after takeoff. Eyewitnesses watched as the plane banked sharply, rolled onto its side, and nosedived into the Francis S. Taylor Wildlife Management Area in the Everglades, a few miles west of Miami, at a speed in excess of 507 miles per hour. The pilots made a valiant effort to control things. That they thought basically that the plane lost control just 10 seconds before the impact. So the captain was in control and trying to safely get that back to the airport. But unfortunately, examination of the debris showed that fire had burned through the floorboards in the cabin and resulted in a structural failure, but more importantly, damaged the cables underneath the instrument panels. And also, they could not rule out that they were incapacitated by smoke or heat in the cockpit during the last 7 seconds of the flight. But I think it's well thought that the controls just weren't working because of the fire at that point.
Also, this was back in the day when you could just enter the cockpit no problem from the outside.
Right. And this is not fly-by-wire. This is cables and pulleys and hydraulics. It's there's no electrical. I mean, there's a little bit of electrical, but it's not like the sophisticated fly-by-wire stuff we have now. Anyway, so unfortunately, as we would expect, all 110 passengers did not survive in this crash. And because of the location, it was extremely difficult to get to the location, and the location had its own complications. For example, the nearest road of any kind was more than a quarter of a mile away, and it was in a deep water swamp. In addition to that, sawgrass, alligators, and the risk of bacterial infection from cuts plagued searchers involved in the recovery effort. So basically, it couldn't have been more difficult to get to the site and deal with that. The NTSB conducted a 15-month investigation, which determined that the fire had developed in the cargo compartment below the passenger cabin. So the upshot, basically, this is a little bit technical, but I'm going to explain it because it is important. So the NTSB determined that just before takeoff, 144 expired chemical oxygen generators had been placed in the cargo compartment in 5 boxes. This violated the FAA regulations forbidding the transport of hazardous materials in the passenger aircraft cargo holds. This is why you can't bring your lithium-ion battery in there.
What is a lithium-ion battery?
Well, I just know when they fail, they explode.
Right.
But a failure to cover the generator's firing pins with the prescribed plastic caps made accidental activation much more likely. The investigation revealed that rather than covering the pins, maintenance personnel simply cut the cords attached to the pins or applied duct tape around the cans. Yes, duct tape, well known to be a very safe product for this sort of situation. And consumer-grade adhesive tape was also used to secure the ends. They indicated on the cargo manifest that the oxy canisters were loosely packed in boxes. Each were sealed with tape and bubble wrap and were, quote-unquote, empty. That was determined not to be the case. The boxes were then loaded in, mistakenly believing that the devices were simply empty canisters and would be safe and legal to transport on a passenger aircraft. For those of you who don't know, because I didn't know, chemical oxygen generators, when activated, produce oxygen for passengers if the plane suffers a decompression. So presumably the mask comes down. They don't have big oxygen tanks. These generate oxygen. But it is a certain type of reaction called an exothermic reaction, which creates a lot of heat. Therefore, not only could the heat and generated oxygen start a fire, but the oxygen could also keep the fire burning. The investigators determined that one of the oxygen canisters was likely triggered when the plane experienced a slight jolt while taxiing,
Mhm.
And as it taxied and took off, the generator began releasing heat and caused the other canisters to activate. Each activation created more heat, which rapidly caused all the generators to activate, a chain reaction. The intense heat ignited a fire of the other cargo materials, and the fire worsened by the presence of the two main aircraft tires. There were aircraft tires in the plane that popped, which made problems as well because they contain oxygen. So the problem is the oxygen from the generators fed the resulting fire in the cargo hold without any need for outside air, defeating the cargo hold's airtight design, which was theoretically to prevent fire by eliminating oxygen. So no oxygen, no fire, therefore it's safe. But when you put oxygen generating devices in there, you now have a recipe for a fire.
2 questions.
Yeah.
Is a pet cargo hold different from the regular cargo hold?
They've changed cargo holds. No, animals can go in the cargo hold. I'll come back to that. But investigators determined in the process, the fire began to destroy the control cables that ran to the back of the aircraft, which is why the pilots began losing control before it crashed. And that the airplane was under positive control by the pilots until the sharp turn right and dive prior to impact. So they were giving it their best effort.
Good on them. Second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't basically every rechargeable battery a lithium-ion battery?
Yes.
And how many people just blatantly lie?
Yeah, that's true. It's not ideal. But the regulatory change that came of this, and that's why I said more to come, is that smoke detectors in the cargo holds can alert the flight crew of fire long before the problem becomes apparent in the cabin. And a fire suppression system buys valuable time to land the plane safely. This would have prevented a scenario similar to this crash, in which the emergency had escalated beyond the flight crew's ability to respond by the time that the problem had become apparent. In February 1998, the FAA issued revised standards requiring all Class D cargo holds, which this one was, to be converted by early 2001 to Class C or E. These types of holds have additional fire detection and fire suppression equipment. But yes, animals can go in the cargo hold and survive, so I would suspect they're not as airtight, because otherwise you would die. But if you have fire detection and suppression, that's theoretically a better system than just depriving oxygen, because in this situation, there was nothing they could do. I mean, there's too much oxygen. So, this at least made some positive change in the way that cargo holds were handled and the way that fire suppression and fire detection were implemented in future aircraft.
It's odd that either they had to go to a Class C or a Class E, just getting rid of the Class D cargo hold.
Yeah, that is weird.
Right?
Class D, it's an elegant solution. Just make it airtight. But unfortunately, this was literally the perfect storm, perfect series of events. But when air disasters are so uncommon, it almost has to be, if common things caused them, they would happen all the time. But for them to be so spectacularly uncommon means that the perfect set of circumstances, and by perfect, I mean worst set of circumstances, would have to occur.
Fair. So what happened? Who went to jail for this?
Really? Basically, the company got in trouble. So ValuJet got in trouble. The maintenance contractor got in trouble for marking these as empty. But I don't believe there were any criminal charges. I don't have that information, but the main contributors were just the airline and the maintenance people who loaded the stuff on the plane.
I feel like you're burying the real lead here in pop culture. The series premiere of CSI Miami also referenced elements of this crash.
Oh, I missed that.
Such as the Everglades search.
Yeah, I did miss that. I'm sorry.
I didn't put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah. I don't even want to know what Horatio Kane says in the beginning of that episode.
I want to say they were still serious, more serious back then.
Right. He didn't do, yeah.
Yeah. He didn't do,
won't get fooled again.
Well, you know what they say, Speed. The Everglades suck. Everglades.
Everglades. Yeah. He puts his glasses on. That's the worst impression of the Who song, by the way.
I still remember the one where he's like, well, you know what they say? Speed kills. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. That was in May, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, unfortunately, 2 months passed.
2 months passed.
And then another thing happened.
Another thing did happen, yes.
So I think more people are familiar with the Trans World Airlines Flight 800 or TWA 800.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have a new conspiracy theory on why this one happened.
Oh, interesting.
It has trans in the name, so I believe Donald Trump was responsible for,
Taking it out, yeah.
Well, I'm just saying. Anyway, that was my little joke, but we'll get into the serious nature of this now. So this was a scheduled international passenger flight from JFK in New York to Rome with a stopover in France. 12 minutes after takeoff, the Boeing 747-100 exploded and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean south of the Hamptons in New York. Do you know where the Hamptons is?
Yes, it's where that one concierge doctor on USA practiced medicine.
And Ina Garten, the barefoot Contessa, lives there.
With Jeffrey.
Jeffrey's going to love this. He's not going to love this podcast, though.
That was a question yesterday at trivia. Which
Emeritus
we won,
Dean of, I think, business at Yale.
Really?
Yeah.
I figured he was just like a trad husband or something.
No, he's an emeritus professor of, I think it's economics or something at Yale.
Wow.
So, anyway, the aircraft involved was manufactured in July 1971. So I guess 25 years old, and completed nearly 17,000 flights and around 93 hours of operation. The crew is led by 58-year-old Captain Ralph G. Kevorkian. That's not
no relation.
I don't know, actually. I feel like they would have said that. It's not funny. It's just like that name has become so,
synonymous.
It also seems kind of like a rare name. Anyway, correct us if we're wrong. He had flown for TWA for 31 years and the U.S. Air Force for 9 years and had logged many, many hours. And then the other captain, Stephen E. Snyder, 57, had flown for TWA for 32 years. There were actually like 4 other people. There was like people training in the cockpit and the navigator and like the systems person. But it just got to be too many people to name them all. So there were actually 230 people on board in total, which included 16 other crew members and 20 off-duty employees, because those employees were going to be the crew meant to cover the Paris to Rome leg. But unfortunately, none of the 230 occupants of the aircraft survived. Notable passengers included, this is a brief list, there's more. This is interesting. Jed Johnson, Andy Warhol's partner of 12 years, interior designer and director, passed away.
Up to the max.
Pam Lichtner, American crime victims' rights advocate and former TWA flight attendant.
Rip to the max.
This one, maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Courtney Elizabeth Johns, sister of Jeff Johns. Do you know why that's important?
Jeff Johns, the comic book artist?
Yes. And his sister, Courtney Elizabeth Johns, was the inspiration for the DC comic superhero Courtney Whitmore / Stargirl.
Oh, really?
So I figured I threw that in there for you. I
appreciate that.
Yeah. Jack O'Hara, executive producer of ABC Sports. Along with his wife and daughter, he was going to France to supervise coverage of the Tour de France. It's a bike race, right? This is the saddest part. In what was to be his last assignment for the network after being let go the previous week. Dear God, if you thought you were having a bad day. Yeah, that's really rough. And to make it even worse, so sorry, 16 students and 5 adult chaperones from the French club of the Montoursville area high school in Pennsylvania also passed away on this flight.
I'm sorry. Did they also have like 16 newborn babies and a crate of puppies in the cargo hold?
Yeah. There was a bunch of nuns on their way to a convention. Now, this isn't funny, but it's like, it just goes to show you that like, it's always just a combination of regular people going through regular things, and like some of them having a bad day, some of them about to go on the trip of a lifetime. And it's why it's such a tragedy when these things happen, because, we'd like it to never happen, but it's impossible to make it zero.
And
Try.
I apologize. Jeff Johns is a comic book writer, screenwriter, and film and television producer. He isn't an artist.
I see. So I'm going to read a little bit about why this happened. I'm trying to get through it here. On the day of the accident, the airplane departed from Athens, Greece, as TWA Flight 881 and arrived at JFK in the evening, 4:30. It was then refueled and the crew was changed. The ground maintenance crew locked out the thrust reverser for engine number 3 because of technical problems with the sensors during the landing at JFK. And additionally, severed cables for the engine's thrust reverser were replaced. Yikes. During refueling of the aircraft, the volumetric shutoff control, which I believe is like when you go to the gas pump and it turns off, similar to that, was believed to have been triggered before the tanks were full. So to continue the pressure fueling, a TWA mechanic overrode the automatic VSO by pulling the fuse and an overflow circuit breaker. It indicates that the aircraft had numerous VSO-related maintenance write-ups in the weeks before the accident. The flight was disabled by about an hour because of some issue on the ground with some non-aircraft equipment and a baggage problem. They pushed back from the gate and they started the engines at 8 p.m. Interestingly, they only started engines 1, 2, and 4, and then started number 3 about 10 minutes later during the taxi. They departed uneventfully, taking off from runway 22 right 5 minutes later at 8:19 p.m. They received their usual series of heading changes and generally increasing altitude assignments. And weather in the area was light winds, scattered clouds, dusk lighting conditions. The last radio transmission from the airplane occurred 11 minutes later at 8:30 p.m. when the flight crew received and acknowledged instructions from Boston Center to climb to 15,000 feet. The last recorded radar transponder return from the airplane was recorded by the FAA radar at 8:31 p.m., which is presumably around when it crashed or exploded. 38 seconds later, David McLean, the captain of Eastwind Airlines Flight 507, a Boeing 737, reported to Boston that he quote, just saw an explosion out here, adding, quote, we just saw an explosion up ahead of us here, about 16,000 feet or something like that. It just went down into the water. Subsequently, many air traffic control facilities in the area received reports of an explosion from other pilots, and witnesses in the vicinity saw or heard explosions and large fireballs, observed debris, and various civilian, military, and police vessels reached the crash site within minutes of the initial impact. Unfortunately, the search for survivors was fruitless, and making this the second deadliest aircraft incident in the United States at that time.
I believe it's pronounced debris.
Debris. Detritus. So the NTSB investigation ended with the adoption of the board's final report in August 2000, and they determined that the probable cause was an explosion of the center wing fuel tank resulting from ignition of the flammable fuel-air mixture in the tank. The source of ignition could not be determined with certainty, but of the sources evaluated with the investigation, the most likely was a short circuit outside of the tank that allowed excessive voltage to enter it through electrical wiring associated with the fuel quantity indication system, or gas gauge. It's all these terms.
Have you seen the frame of the CIA's animated depiction of how the TWA Flight 800 broke apart?
No, but I feel like I should watch that.
You just described it, right? Like,
yeah.
The bottom of the aircraft blew out from the exploding fuel tank, and the crack spread around the fuselage and severed the entire front section of the plane. Ugh. It's like the plane got decapitated.
In addition to the probable cause, the NTSB found that the following contributing factors: the design and certification concept that fuel tank explosions could be prevented solely by precluding ignition sources, and the certification of the 747 with heat sources located beneath the central wing tank with no means to reduce the heat transferred into the CWT or to render the fuel tank vapor non-combustible. In its final report, the NTSB issued 15 safety recommendations, mostly covering fuel tank and wiring related issues. Apparently, we've adopted something like 83% of all NTSB recommendations, so that's good. Among the recommendations was that significant consideration should be given to the development of modifications such as nitrogen inerting systems for new airplane designs. So basically pumping nitrogen in so that it can't combust because there's no oxygen. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
As long as they don't keep oxygen generators in the fuel tank, we should be fine. Right?
That's weird that they don't ask about that at the airports these days.
Some other legacy stuff, though.
Mm-hmm.
So the crash of TWA and that of ValuJet, Flight 592, earlier in 96, prompted Congress to pass the Aviation Disaster Family Assistance Act of 1996. Among other things, it gives the NTSB, instead of the particular airline involved, responsibility for coordinating services to the families of victims of fatal aircraft accidents. In addition, this is key, it restricts lawyers and other parties from contacting family members within 30 days of the accident. So pretty much NTSB is where it all runs through.
Interesting.
And it's a bipartisan, committee. It's not, in theory, politicized.
I'm sure they'll
however,
find a way on that.
During the investigation, the NTSB and FBI clashed with each other. The agencies lacked a detailed protocol describing which agency should take the lead. It was because there was some thought that maybe there was a bomb that exploded or there was like a missile or a terrorist attack. So the FBI wanted to get involved. At the time of the crash, the federal regulations specified that the NTSB's aviation accident investigations have priority over all federal investigations, but the FBI felt there could have been criminal involvement, so they felt they had to be involved. So after the investigation, it was recognized for there was a need for better clarity, and so the NTSB sought and secured language to clarify the issue in 2000. Which then led to, in 2005, the NTSB and FBI entering into a memorandum of understanding in that the NTSB will be the key investigative agency, but that they will coordinate with the FBI and they can share resources to further investigate the crash. So this did help basically solidify the NTSB as the definitive body to investigate air accidents. The last two things that are kind of interesting, for almost 25 years, the wreckage of Flight 800 was kept by the NTSB and used as an accident investigation teaching aid. By 2021, the methods taught using the wreckage were determined to no longer be relevant to modern accident investigation, which then relied heavily on new technology, including three-dimensional laser scanning. They did not wish to renew the lease, so it was decommissioned in 2021, and they scanned or had planned to scan each piece with a three-dimensional scanner, with the data being permanently archived, after which the wreckage would be destroyed and the metal recycled. And the wreckage was destroyed in June 2023 near the former Ashburn facility in which it was housed. So it taught a lot of people about air investigations, air crash investigations. It clarified investigative policies. It improved the design of fuel tanks. And it allowed the NTSB to be the primary point of contact for the families of the victims. So overall, at least there were some positive changes made to the industry and the safety recommendations, which is, if you're going to look for the small bright spot in any of these things, that would be it.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed is that there's an article from 1996 from the LA Times talking about how a TWA pilot that was a friend of not Jack, what was his name? Robert? Nope.
The pilot?
The Kevorkian.
Oh yeah, Kevorkian.
Ralph Kevorkian.
Ralph Kevorkian.
So apparently, at the time, just like now, there some baseless accusations came out based on incomplete facts before, like you were saying, and they're like, this Kevorkian guy had a strike on his record, and apparently the strike is he landed a plane when he was told to turn away in St. Louis because he didn't want to wait to burn off 7,000 pounds of fuel. And
Yeah, that's crazy. Like,
because there was like a winter storm coming in, and he didn't want to try to make it to New York with on low fuel because he was afraid they would be sent away after he burned it off.
Yeah. And then, so he therefore blew up the plane he was flying. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's the stupidest thing. I mean, they detected explosive residue at one point, so they thought there was a bomb. But like the wreckage pattern didn't show any of the things that happen to metal when there's an explosion,
right?
From an explosive device. And it turned out they had done like a dog bomb sniffing dog exercise in that plane, or they theorized that perhaps some explosive residue from a military vessel, was tracked into the in the area or contaminated on the parts. So, they couldn't really ever prove it, and I think their explanation is pretty plausible. Fuel when mixed with air is pretty damn explosive. Although jet fuel is a little bit more like diesel, which requires a sustained, you don't have a spark plug on a diesel, you have a glow plug because it requires like a sustained higher heat ignition point. So perhaps this short circuit caused an issue there. But it makes you wonder if like the volumetric sensor thing wasn't working. Like, was there a problem with the pressure in the tank or whatever? So yeah, I mean, it's a real tragedy in any case.
Yeah. And then I also got distracted because it said, the LA Times had an article that said Trump floods California by releasing Northern California water.
Is he allowed to do that?
Federally run dam or something. I don't know.
Oh, all right.
Anyway.
He's going to kill those marmots or whatever.
He's going to flood the Central Valley and cause a drought for.
There's a wave of water behind you that you can't see right now.
Oh no! Yeah.
Anyway,
well, those were two crazy 1996 accidents that helped inform the future of aviation.
Well, let's just hope that something is learned from these accidents. Like, don't speculate before all the facts are known, and then once we do know the facts, maybe we can improve the safety of aviation yet further.
Oh, and also don't blame it on DEI hires.
Yeah, that's bullshit, Donald.
Mm-hmm. Donald.
I'm not going to listen to your podcast anymore. You're liberal. You think? Okay.
Wow. We had a BLM special, like the third episode.
Yeah. I hope this wasn't offensive. The intention was to, sort of pay tribute, learn a little bit about air safety in the U.S. And, it's on everyone's mind right now. So it just seemed like a good topic to cover.
Yeah.
And we love aviation.
Glad that finished with the word aviation. All right. Any final thoughts? Well, that was your final thoughts of the episode. Yeah, that's it for this week's edition, Namely 90s. You'll find new episodes out every Monday until the end of May. Find us on Instagram, Bluesky, and YouTube at Namely 90s with 90s, and tell us what you want us to talk about on future episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/namely90s, also with a 90s. And finally, you can also contact us through our website, namely90s.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, the giant floodwaters that's secretly behind me, Pocket Cast, CastBox, iHeart, Good Pods, and wherever you get podcasts from. I'm Brandon. That's Andrew, and we will catch you next time.
I don't know. I think I'm driving.